Something's being built on the south lawn of the White House. Cement trucks. Cranes. The kind of noise you don't usually hear 100 feet from the Oval Office. The same week ground broke on that project. A few blocks away, the Commerce Department quietly signed something else. No press conference, no cameras. One of those two things made every headline in the country. The other one is the reason this episode exists. By the end of this video, you understand why a fight over a dirty, unglamorous rock might matter more to America's national defense than anything happened on that lawn. Chapter 1. Why this should matter to you. Here's the short version. Before we get into any of the history, no high-purity anthracite coal, no specialty steel. No specialty steel, no aircraft carrier deck. No submarine hull plating, no kind of steel the Pentagon actually needs. It's that direct line. Today, roughly 70% of the steel made in America comes out of electric arc furnaces. Cleaner, more efficient, the technology this country bet on to modernize its steel industry. The Department of Energy said as much in January when it formally designated the coal used in steelmaking a critical material. But electric arc furnaces have one hidden dependency. They need a very specific, very pure ingredient shoveled into the melt. An ingredient most Americans have never heard of and would drive right past if they saw it stacked at a rail yard. This isn't a story about home heating. It's a story about whether the country that builds the world's most advanced Navy can still make the steel that Navy is built from. Chapter 2. What actually happened? Let's put the two stories back together. The construction on the south lawn is a helipad. Granite was the White House seal carved into the center. President Trump confirmed it himself in the Oval Office. $5 to $6 million, paid for in full by Sikorsky Aircraft, the Lockheed Martin subsidiary that builds Marine One. The reason is mechanical, not decorative. The newer VH-928 Patriot helicopters run hot enough on landing to scorch, even tear up the grass. Granite solves that problem, simple as that. On July 29th, the Secretary of Commerce opened his Section 232 national security investigation into imports of anthracite coal. It was published in the Federal Register on July 7th. Public comments were due by July 21st, 14 days. For context, a Section 232 investigation is the same legal tool Washington used for the steel and aluminum tariffs in Trump's first term. The president can act on imports found to threaten national security without waiting on Congress. These investigations typically run for months. This one gave the public 2 weeks. Here's why the speed matters. Whatever comes out of this investigation, tariffs quota, becomes leverage. And leverage is worth more lock-in before you sit down at the table than after. The table in question is the one Trump and Xi are expected to share this fall. Chapter 3. Why this is happening. The hidden cost of cleaner steel. For most of the 20th century, American steel came out of blast furnaces. Iron ore, coke, enormous heat, thick black smoke. Over the last couple decades, the US and its allies moved towards something cleaner, the electric arc furnace. Instead of starting from raw ore, an electric arc furnace melts scrap steel directly using an electric arc hot enough to hit several thousand degrees. Cleaner, more efficient, a genuine industrial upgrade. But melted scrap has a problem. Its carbon content is inconsistent. To turn a vat of molten scrap into steel hard enough to stop a strike or strong enough to take a fighter jet landing on a flight deck, steelmakers add a very specific charge ingredient, high-purity anthracite. It works as a foaming agent to protect the furnace lining and as the precise carbon source the mix needs. Cleaner steel, same old vulnerability. It just moved to a different part of the supply chain. Here's the part that deserves real precision, because it's easy to overstate. America is not out of coal. By total volume, the US is actually the 8th largest anthracite exporter in the world, a net exporter of the stuff in all but a handful of years since 1980. So this isn't a story about scarcity. It's a story about a very specific gap. The narrow slice of ultra-high purity, furnace-grade anthracite that America's defense-critical steelmaking depends on, and where that particular slice is coming from. America isn't out of coal. America is out of the right coal in the right place at the right purity. Pennsylvania's Appalachian coal country used to supply exactly that grade. Dozens of anthracite mines once ran through that region. Most have shrunk or closed over the decades, not because the coal ran out, but because it stopped being cheap enough to compete with imports. That's exactly the kind of gap the CCP has gotten good at finding. Follow the customs data and one country stands out. Of the roughly $37 million in anthracite coal the US imported, nearly 2/3, almost 24 million, came from Peru. Peru is not a hostile country. It's not on anyone's watch list, which is exactly why it's worth a closer look. The largest port near those mines is Chancay, about 40 miles north of Lima. It opened in 2024. 60% of it is owned by Costco Shipping. a Chinese state-owned company. The other 40% belongs to a Peruvian mining firm. Chinese state banks financed close to $1 billion of the build-out. Not China the country, the Chinese Communist Party. The party whose state-owned banks wrote the checks, and whose state-owned shipping company holds the controlling stake in the port those coal shipments move through. There's no Chinese military base at Chankay today. There doesn't need to be. Owning the port is enough to decide whose cargo moves first and whose doesn't. And this isn't the first time the CCP has found a choke point like this. 2 years ago, it was rare earth minerals. The materials inside everything from missiles to phones. Beijing controlled the processing, tying the tap. And that leverage became one of the things that shaped the last trade truce between Washington and Beijing. This time, the material is dirtier, cheaper looking, and far less famous. But the playbook is the same. Put it together and the shape of the problem is clear. America runs 70% of its steel through electric arc furnaces. Those furnaces depend on a narrow category of specialty anthracite. A large share of that specific import stream flows through a port the Chinese Communist Party controls the majority stake in. If that single link ever got squeezed, the way rare earths got squeezed, the effect wouldn't show up as a coal shortage. It would show up as a steel shortage, which becomes a shipbuilding delay, which becomes a defense contractor waiting on a plate steel it can't get anywhere else fast enough. That's the read on why a 14-day comment window matters more than it looks. Washington moved on this choke point months before the cameras were pointed at it, and months before the two leaders are set to sit down again this fall, with a summit both sides have pointed to, though nothing about that date is locked yet. So picture those two images side by side one more time. A granite helipad built to survive the heat of a helicopter engine, and a grimy chunk of coal moving through a port on the other side of the world that the Pentagon can't build a warship without. The handshake is the show. The supply chain is the plot. And the Chinese Communist Party has gotten very good at writing plots nobody's watching. Keep an eye on the ports, not just the podiums. That's usually where the real story is. For more story like this, be sure to hit subscribe. We'll see you next time.